Hi, everybody. My name is Hilary Inwood. I hope I'm starting in the right way here. Tim and I are having some technical difficulties, and I've lost communication with him. But he's telling me on printing that it's time to start, so I'm going to introduce myself, if that's all right. Tim usually does the honors, but that's okay. The joys of technology. So thank you so much for joining us today. This is my first webinar, and I'm really pleased to see so many people in the room with us. I really do appreciate the time that you've taken to come and learn a little bit more about artistic approaches to environmental education. I think Tim would do a general introduction, if he could, right now, about Green Teacher, and I am just so thrilled that Green Teacher magazine has sponsored and set up all of these webinars. I've been following them along myself too, and they have been some really wonderful presentations so far. I feel very honored to be included as part of this particular group. You'll know that, of course, Green Teacher does run a fantastic, quite magnificent magazine, and it's one that I recommend to certainly all of my students at the University of Toronto that I work with. And they also have a fantastic series of books that they've put out, which again are ones that I highly recommend, that show you how to do environmental and sustainability education at the elementary years, the middle years, the high school years, and that's the slide that I've got up right now. Now, I'll have to tell you right now, we're running without our captain. As far as I know, Tim has had to leave the room because of these technical difficulties. So I can read your comments right now in the chat room. So if I am speaking not loudly enough, if I am speaking too quickly, please just put your comments in the chat room, and I will try to chat them as best I can until we can get Tim back on so I can hear him in my ears. Because right now I'm just kind of flying here. So I think you've got a picture of me up on the screen right now. I'm assuming that's what it is. I actually can't see that picture of myself. But I'll tell you a little bit about myself to start. I work as a teacher educator at OISE, which is the Ontario Institute for Studies in Education, and that's at the University of Toronto in Toronto, Canada. So I'm not sure where all of you have come in from today. I've been at OISE for, and I'm getting comments from people that there is no photo up, so I apologize about that. We're, again, experiencing, obviously, some technical difficulties, but that's okay. We'll get it sorted out. I'm going to suggest that not seeing a photo of me maybe is not a terrible thing. The most important thing at this point is that you can hear me, and if you can hear me and see the PowerPoint slides, then that really is the most important bit. So we've got a questionnaire up there to learn a little bit more about you. I teach in, obviously, a university setting in a teacher education program. I've been there for about 10 years. And I started there as an art educator, but over the last decade I've also developed expertise in environmental education as well. And I'm one of those sort of unusual people who has an arts background that plays in environmental ed circles. So I'd really like to know a little bit about what settings you teach in. You can see that there are a number up on the questionnaire I've got up on the screen right now. So if you can click one or more, whatever applies to you, that would help us. Tim, hopefully, if he reappears, is going to collect that data and report it back into us in a couple of minutes. But it really does depend a little bit on whether he can get back in or not. Your relationship with the arts is something I'm also interested in. I guess I qualify under all three of those categories because I'm always interested in learning more about the arts and about environmental and sustainability education. I dabble when I can, not as often as I would like to, but I am involved regularly, I guess, in that dabbling. Between being an educator, being a researcher, an artist, and a mother, and a dedicated dog owner to boot, the art making doesn't happen as often as I would like, but it does certainly happen as part of my life on a regular basis. So if you can click on those and submit, hopefully Tim will be collecting those sometime soon. Okay, so we're going to head into the presentation at this point. This is what we're going to aim to do over the next 25 minutes or so. We've already done some introductions, which is terrific to start. I'm going to do a few more of those in a minute into the subject matter we're talking about. We're going to talk a little bit about why to integrate the arts with environmental education. I've used the EE short form. I hope that's okay. Most of you probably will click in to that. On occasion, I might even sneak in ESE, which is Environmental and Sustainability Education. I'm going to take a little bit of time to define environmental art, talk a little bit about its roots, And then we're going to talk a little bit about strategies that you can use for artistic approaches to EE. I do have to explain that because I work in a teacher education program, most of the work that I do is school-based approaches to EE. So if I am veering too far off, for those of you who work in community settings, just feel free to type a pointer to me in the chat room, and I would be happy to address questions that way too. Typically, Tim would be filtering questions for you, but right now I'm not having him tap in. So, pop your questions up, and we'll do the best we can as we go along. Okay, so here we go. We're going to start with Bill McGibbon's quote from 2005, and I love this quote. Here's the paradox. If the scientists are right, we're living through the biggest thing that's happened since human civilization emerged. One species, ours, has by itself, in the course of a couple of generations, managed to powerfully raise the temperature of an entire planet, to knock its most basic systems out of kilter. But oddly, though we know about it, we don't know about it. It hasn't registered in our gut. It isn't part of our culture. Where are the books, the poems, the plays, the goddamn operas? And thank you, Susan. I'm getting some sound interference, too, and I will flag that to Tim just in case. I think I'm getting a bit of feedback, and we're having a delay for some reason. Okay, mine just stopped,
Hi,
so I'm hoping... Oh, and there's Tim. Tim, hello.
Yes, hi, everybody. Sorry for the problems, but I am back, and I think the problem is your sound interference is coming from me, so I'm going to unlock myself and go silent again, but at least I know how to interact when I need to.
Okay. Well, nice to have you back, Tim. Nice to know you're back in the loop somehow, and that at least you're listening. And you're right. The sound interference, at least on my end, has stopped at this point. So why I find Bill McGibbon's quote a really interesting one is that Bill is a really well-known environmentalist and writer about everything environmental. Fantastic. I just finished reading his nature book that was out last year. So really interesting that he, in 2005, had no clue that there are artists, musicians, singers, creative writers who are working in the area of environmentalism and with environmental issues at the core of their artistic work. So it struck me that if Bill doesn't know about these things, then other people don't others. And certainly this was an early flag for me in some of my research work that we need to do a whole lot better job in the arts of sharing what work is already being done in these areas. And that's part of what I'd like to do with you tonight, is to share a little bit. So in part of my definitions of environmental art, which I have to tell you, even 12 years out after I've been studying this area for about 12 years, I'm still trying to get the perfect definition of environmental art, and it's one that's still in formation in my mind, just because the work that falls into this category is so broad and not easily defined by medium or a single idea or a single approach. And of course, if we took that to environmental arts, which would include dance, drama, music, all of the arts, as well as visual arts, that definition, I think, would have to be even broader. But certainly in the visual arts, is my area of expertise. Tim, we're getting a little bit of feedback again on the sound for some reason. The roots are important for me. What have artists looked to in the past? So part of that has certainly been roots in Aboriginal and Native Canadian, Native American, whichever part of the world you're from, Native approaches to art making. Some of those traditional approaches are ones that artists have been drawing from in the environmental art movement. I've got an example of a Native Canadian piece on the left-hand side. It's an Algonquian petroglyph from Petroglyphs Provincial Park. Fantastic place in Ontario to visit if you've never been there before. So, these very low-impact nature-based forms of art making, ones that draw on archetypal imagery, are ones certainly that environmental artists today are drawing on. And in fact, if you look at Robert Smithson's piece from 1970, his very well-known spiral jetty, you can see some of that archetypal imagery resurfacing in his work. His work is part of the Earthworks movement from the 70s, and they really are the sort of earliest Western artists, anyway, that are starting to deal with environmental issues in their work. We can look to all sorts of examples of public art, of conceptual art, artists that draw more on ideas than they do on an aesthetic approach to art making as part of that roots too. couple more examples we can take a look at here. And these are nature-based artists who use pretty much exclusively natural materials. You might be familiar with Andy Goldsworthy's work. Of course, it's very well known. He's a Scottish artist who draws very heavily on place in the creation of his work. And, it really depends on your perspective. Some people consider him to be an environmental artist. Others do not. So, again, that's where that definition floats around a lot. Niels Udo, also having done a lot of work in this area in the past. I love this piece. It's a giant nest that he created in 1978. I've always thought that would be a wonderful addition to a children's playground somewhere. So the roots are important when it comes to defining environmental art. But so is the actual practice, I think, of the piece, too. I've seen lots of people who declare themselves to be environmental artists, but I've got to admit, not sure if I buy into it because they're still using relatively toxic materials. Often their work doesn't, their actual practice doesn't focus so much on the environment, even though they might label themselves that way. So two artists, again, drawing from the 80s, who I would certainly consider in this category, would be Joseph Beuys and Agnes Denis. Joseph Beuys, German artist who incredibly well known in Europe, not so well known in North America, did a great piece called 7,000 Oaks in 1982, where he did a huge tree planting, 7,000 oak trees in Kassel, Germany, alongside the community. He got all sorts of people involved in this. And did tree planting as a form of art making. That was his absolutely came out of a concern with deforestation, collaboration, and that he involved the entire community in it, and sustainability focus, of course, because these trees are going to continue to grow and add to the environment in a positive way as they move forward into the future. Agnes Denis's piece, this is a classic, and I just love this. You can see it's in Manhattan before the Twin Towers came down. This was an abandoned lot that it was actually an old landfill that she, with a local community center, planted an entire field of wheat. It's a great piece. And you can go to Green Museum if you want for a little bit more information. I'll give you the URL for Green Museum at the end, and you can get a little more information about that piece. But a great community piece, not only growing the wheat, but also having children at the local community center mill it into flour and then bake their own bread. So great way to raise food issues. Well, Noel Harding, local Toronto artist, got to introduce a little bit of Canadian work in here too. His Elevated Wetlands piece from 1997, not only a really interesting piece in terms of its use of plastics as a planting material, believe it or not, but it's also a great way he's created to filter the polluted river, the Don River, which runs right alongside this. So using art not just to raise awareness around environmental issues, but also to actually ameliorate them, to correct some of those challenges that we're facing. The third thing I think that helps define environmental art, I'm sorry, I forgot. I had this piece in there. This is one of Chris Jordan's piece. And I've got to tell you about him. He's an American artist, really clever young artist. This is a great piece. You probably recognize the imagery. It's from a Hokusai's Wave piece from the 1800s, very well-known Japanese print. And you might want to try and guess here exactly what it's made out of, because this is a big piece now. The Hokusai print was very small. This is an 8 by 11 foot piece. Here's what it's made out of. Oh, I lost one of my slides in there, so I'm not sure what happened to it. And I'm just going to click forward and see if we can pick it up, because it really is a great picture. If I can find, there it is. I'm not sure what happened there. The order got a little flipped around. This is a detail of Chris Jordan's work. You can see through his practice that he absolutely is using materials that are environmentally devastating to our oceans. He's used plastic bits. And this is a quote from him. This piece depicts 2.4 million pieces of plastic, which is equal to the number of pounds of plastic pollution that enter the world's oceans every hour. So thank you, Rebecca, for the guess of sand. It's not sand in this case. It's plastic that he made the piece out of. And all of the plastic in this image he collected from the Pacific Ocean. There are lots of artists doing this in their practice these days, taking materials that cause issues in our environment, and they're making art out of them. Great way to take some of those materials out of the environment, but also a fantastic way to raise people's awareness about our environmental challenges today. So third thing I think that really does help to define environmental art are the values that underlie the piece. And I think this is a really important one. It's one that Anne Rosenthal, who's a educator from the States, has written on quite a bit and has got a great definition of values on her website if you look her up on Google. Certainly increasing awareness about the environmental crisis, I think, is important if you're going to define yourself as an environmental artist or someone who makes environmental or environmentally themed art. Utilizing systems thinking in some way, I think, is part of that. Certainly addressing issues of social and eco-justice is part of that as well. So if we take a look at Mel Chin's work from 1991, this is a fantastic piece that was sort of an art-science integration. And he was growing hyper-accumulator plants, ones that suck toxins, heavy metals out of the soil. He worked alongside Rufus Cheney, who was a scientist at that time, who was looking for some funding to try growing these plants on some kind of, in this case, a landfill in St. Paul's, Minnesota. And they wanted to try it together. And in fact, they got the money through Mel Chin, who was the artist, not through the scientist, interestingly enough, to try it. But they framed this as an art piece. Merle Lademan Kellys, who has a wonderful job as the artist in residence for the Sanitation Department of New York City. This is one of her mirrored garbage trucks, certainly raising awareness around not just issues of waste disposal in, of course, New York City. That's so very important. But also she wants you to think about the bigger picture and the role that our consumptive lifestyles has on garbage and the amount of garbage that we create. So, both of these artists in the early years were certainly doing some wonderful work in this area. Now, this is where I know my slides have gotten a little messed up. So we're going to see. Yeah, okay. So we're going to play these as we can go here. Edward Bratinsky is another Canadian artist. Even though this is a shot he took in California of the Oxford tire pile in a tire dump. Bratinsky does large-scale photographs to raise people's awareness, and I would say his values are absolutely in line with what I would define as environmental art. He has an astounding ability to not only horrify us through these images in terms of the amount of waste and destruction that's going on in our world in terms of human impact, but also just astounding in terms of the beauty of the pieces that he creates, too. They have this interesting double edge. The other artists that I really enjoy, there's another one of Chris Jordan's. I'm sorry, for some reason my have gotten a little out of order. It's just throwing me because they're not in the order. Another one of Chris Jordan's pieces, and you can certainly see in this case, even though his practices as a photographer might not be as sustainable as we'd like, certainly these are really powerful images. He's captured of albatross chicks with plastics full of their belly, probably is what's led to their death, lack of nutrition, because their parents have been feeding them plastics from the ocean. So really astounding, quite horrifying, I think, images. And then Peter Menzel. Now, I know the one we saw very briefly, one of Menzel's photographs a little earlier, and I'll try and scoot back to it in a minute. I'm not sure exactly what number that was. But you can see that what Menzel's done in his Hungry Planet series, which is a great series of photographs, is that he's asked families from around the world to sit down with a week's worth of food. Now, this is no big surprise, a family from America. And, of course, some of the things you might notice that would be great to raise in a class around issues of either social justice, eco-justice, or environmentalism. Do you want to tap a few into the chat room? Yeah, Rebecca's written in overpackaging. You're absolutely right, Rebecca. Isn't that horrifying? How much packaging there is with this particular... And Susan's added the same thing. Thank you, Susan. Processed food is another one that nobody's brought up yet. A lot of processing to the food here. A lot of stuff, like potato chips. I know we think they're food. Oh, yeah, and Sandy's just added in. Thank you, Sandy. Sandy says not real food. I'm with you on that one, Sandy. There's a lot of processed food that goes through there. Now, I'm just going to try and pick up, if I can, and I'm not sure exactly where this was, the Menzel second slide here that got a little out of whack. There it is. So here's a picture of a family that he had met. They were in Darfur, Sudan, but they were a family, they were in Chad, but they were from Darfur. They were a family in a refugee camp. And you can see that there are, 6 members of this family, and that's how much food they have for 1 week. So this series of photographs that he's done is absolutely fascinating, and I love sharing these images to initiate discussion in classes with learners of all ages. They work just as well with children as they do with adults. So that gives you a little bit of an introduction to the kinds of works that I consider to be environmental art. Now, we've got a questionnaire up here. I'm going to pop it up. I'm not sure if Tim's going to be able to feed back information. I know because he can't talk right now because of the feedback issue we're having, that he can't give me any demographics about you, and we were going to invite him to do that now. Unless Tim, you want to come in now?
I probably can. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay, great. So, yes, thank you. And sorry, folks, I'm not sure what our technical difficulty was, but Hilary, you've filled in very well and a great presentation so far. So those of you, just for your sake, Hilary, of those who answered the first question, 11 are non-formal educators working with young people. 3 of you are, 6 of you are elementary school teachers, and we have 3 adult educators and 1 middle school educator. And
okay.
As for your relationship or involvement with the arts, about the majority of you dabble in eco art, and probably another quarter of you are regularly involved in eco art. So the rest are interested in learning.
Excellent. Okay, good. That's actually a pretty good crowd. Thank you, everybody, for doing that. And Tim, I'm so glad you're back with us now. And I'm not getting any sound feedback, Tim. So I think you can stay. We'll let you stay.
All right, that sounds good. Well, I'll
okay.
unplug myself in a second. But for everybody, you're looking now at 2 questions on the screen. Obviously, you can write in any answer that you wish, and Hilary will invite me to come back and report on your answers in just a few minutes. So
okay,
Hilary, why don't you leave the slide up for another maybe 25 seconds or something?
Okay. Okay, so I'm going to move along. I'm appreciative that time is moving along, and I want to just have some time to give you some examples of children's experiments with environmental art, too. I do want to define environmental art education, building on that longer definition of environmental art. This notion that art education can be integrated with environmental education as a means of raising awareness of and engagement with, of course, environmental concepts, issues, and learning. I think it's a really good reminder to all of us, too, that, we really should be embedding more creativity into environmental education, ESD, which is Education for Sustainable Development, and of course Sustainability Education, or SE. It's certainly with my experience in the past with these areas, very science-based approach to learning about the environment. And I think that we need creativity, let's face it, to solve the environmental issues that we are currently facing around the world. And so really important that we have creativity as one of those learning strategies to introduce our learners to. I have certainly goals for integrating art education with environmental ed. I certainly would like to minimize the impact of the learning experiences that currently happen in art and design education. So it's a good reminder for those of you who are art educators that, typically, in the past anyway, the materials, the tools that we've been using are not always environmentally friendly, and we really need to learn how to do better with that. And part of that is going back to the companies that we work with and demanding more sustainable materials, but also learning that there are lots of nature-based materials out there. There are natural materials that our forefathers and mothers have used, and we need to think about returning to some of those materials and techniques over time. Certainly, it's a good reminder to those of us who work in the arts that we absolutely can infuse environmental and sustainability education into what we do in art and design education. There's no reason why we can't do those together. And finally, a great way to model sustainable approaches to creativity. Creativity does not always, again, have to be about toxic materials or approaches, but that we can be modeling creativity in all subject areas and absolutely in our daily lives. And that does rub off on our learners. There's no doubt in my mind about that. These are the strategies I'm going to introduce you to. We're going to talk a little bit about taking it outside, framing arts-based learning, of course, with the environmental line, looking to professional artists for inspiration. I'm going through these quickly only because we're going to go back and focus on each one of these with some examples as we go. So I think we'll have some time to for you to write them down and also to think a little bit about them as we go as well. So first strategy for environmental art education, get those learners outside. Doesn't matter if you're working with adult learners in formal or non-formal settings, whether you're working with children. But we always like to think of, I think we have traditionally thought of art education as a thing you do inside. But I would argue it makes it much more engaging to take it outside. So you're looking at a selection of photographs of young learners, grade 3 students up the top, drawing outside. It's astounding how children's drawings of trees, these little guys were drawing trees at the time, change radically when you take students outside to actually look at a tree, to draw it. Very different from those 2 sticks and a marshmallow top than you normally get inside classrooms. You can do this in any kind of weather. Students on the right-hand side, this was a grade 5 class working in minus 17 degrees Celsius weather in a Canadian winter. I thought they were going to refuse to go outside. They were even more excited to go outside to work with ice sculptures. And then on the left-hand side, you can absolutely tie this into your stewardship concerns at schools. This is actually a school group working with a tree basket, which is a protective metal basket that we use to protect our young trees, and these kids are actually weaving grapevine into it to make it a little more appealing to look at. Second strategy I can recommend for environmental art education is to frame your art making with the environment in mind. This is a great example of a school where one teacher was interested in doing this. It was a grade 5 teacher, and she started doing quite traditional lessons. And she's actually one of the teachers I'm thinking of when I think of the title I gave this session today, which is Shades of Green. Some of her art making started off with what I would consider to be a very light shade of green. They were Georgia O'Keeffe inspired flower paintings and drawings. You can see some of those displayed in that bush on the right-hand side. But over the course of the year, she got more and more serious in terms of her understanding of environmental issues and also the way that she could deal with those. So over the year, I would argue that she started off as sort of a light shade of green, and as the children deepened their understanding of environmentalism over the course of the year, her artworks really did deepen in their shade of green. So she also took that very first strategy of take it outside to heart here as well. They took all of their environmental art of all shades of green out into their small butterfly garden, and they displayed it there for the school. Started with one class the first year. The school was so excited by what they saw. By the second year, they had 3 or 4 classes doing it. And by the third year, the entire school was participating, and the parents were arranging a barbecue to go alongside with it, all that celebrated environmental art. So how amazing is that? And you have to remember that as an educator, if you can model what you believe in, so important that you can have a huge impact in whatever environment you work in, be that a school or a community center. Third strategy I'm going to point out is this notion of looking to professional artists for inspiration. This is a really important one. You saw some of the examples that I've used. And in fact, remember the Wheatfield confrontation one, Agnes Denny's piece I showed you with the Wheatfield in New York City? That was the one I was thinking of when I worked with a school on the right-hand side to plant this art garden. This was a fantastic project because it combined science, and also social studies, because these children were studying pioneer times in their particular social studies unit during this period. They were very interested in what pioneers ate. So taking our inspiration from Agnes Denny's Wheatfield confrontation, we decided to grow a pioneer art garden. The children in their science class planted from seeds foods that pioneers would have eaten in pioneer times. So we had zucchini plants and carrots and tomatoes, sunflowers, and they grew them from seed, and then they planted them into the garden in the spring. And lo and behold, we did consider the planting, by the way, just like Joseph Beuys's work with the 7,000 Oaks, we consider that to be a form of art making. But we also made some sculptures to go along with that. And what a hoot this was for a bunch of us city folks, kids and adults alike, to be making scarecrows. The work on the left was a great piece. This was for a knit bombing piece, and it was absolutely inspired by knit bombing I've been seeing professional artists do. Here in Toronto, Janet Morton's been doing some amazing knit installation pieces. So looking towards those artists, and in this case, doing a knit bombing piece with young learners again in a school garden to highlight the significance of a particular tree in terms of the ecosystem of that particular garden. Susan's asking the question, knit bombing? You're absolutely right. Knit bombing, you have spelt it correctly. It's knit as in knitting, also sometimes, Susan, known as graffiti. And if you just type in knit bombing into Google and do an image search, you'll turn up all sorts of amazing works by artists, young and old, who have been experimenting with this way of drawing your attention to both natural and human-made components of our places. The third strategy I'd recommend is to think local and to make it place-based. So this is a great one. You can have children investigate their local environments. Again, those could be a local park if you're in a community center. It can be a schoolyard if you're working in a formal education setting. And have them do some careful examination of that place, but also see if they can deal with some of the specific environmental issues that are, something that they can control in that place. So these ones, are, to be fair, again, are all from schoolyards. That's where I do most of my work. The one on the left, I love this photo. This is actually a photograph a grade 1 student. So this is sort of like a 5 or 6-year-old took of their place in their schoolyard. And what an unusual perspective. An adult, I almost guarantee, would not have taken that particular photo. And I think it's actually quite a wonderful photo. That's the upper left. The one on the right-hand side, this is a group of grade 6 students who created a whole series of paintings that were mounted on their school fence that dealt with environmental issues that they felt impacted on their specific schoolyard. So this one, if you can read it, says, "Animal homes aren't always seen. Leave them alone. Don't be mean." And there's our CN Tower in the background. And the encouragement, this particular schoolyard that had a large naturalized component for children to leave those animal homes alone. And the bottom one is a giant grapevine basket woven around a medicine wheel garden, which has a Aboriginal education focus, or a Native Canadian focus for us. And this was one that was great. Children created this giant sculpture around the garden as a way to stop others from trampling the garden. So you can use art as a way to deal with some of these stewardship issues that you have in public places, but also to raise, again, awareness of environmental issues. And another strategy for you, make it collaborative. These are great examples of pieces where these do not have to be all solitary works that artists make struggling alone in a garret, which is, of course, our stereotypical image of artists. Both of these projects involved collaborative works between adults and children. So on the left-hand side, the environmental challenge that this particular schoolyard was facing was a lot of graffiti on doors. These are storage doors, in fact, in the children's play yard, and they were getting graffiti that was not of a polite nature that you would want little children to be seeing. So the children designed the images. They came up with drawings of their schoolyard, and the adults were the ones who translated them onto these metal doors, mainly because of the paint that was used. But a great collaboration between the adults and the kids, and no big surprise, cut down on the amount of graffiti on those doors to an astounding amount. The one on the right-hand side, also in a schoolyard, collaborative project between children and their parents and their teachers. This was in a part of the schoolyard where some tree roots were getting heavily impacted from children running over top of them continuously. Decided to sink in a couple of pathways, so we made these into we call these the garden stones. These are all patio stones that were hand cast. The children designed the images for the top. They all have environmental messages, and the parents were the ones who cast them. So it was a great project. I never anticipated the amazingly positive response we would get from the adults who worked on the project. I saw them just as volunteers helping out, but they were thrilled to be involved. So never underestimate bringing children and adults together in, again, formal or non-formal settings in order to work on these art projects together. It can be a great way to build community. And finally, we use this mantra a lot, and certainly our local ministry has built this right into their new policy, learning in, about, and for the environment. For some, that's a contested term, but for me in teacher education, it's a very easy shorthand to introduce my teacher candidates to how they can go about doing environmental education. Because my time is getting low, I'm going to just let you look these ones up. But Stream of Dreams, great Canadian project to introduce children and communities to issues around local watersheds. Project Fishnet, same thing. The URLs are up there, and they're both on the net. You can learn more about them. But these are both really wonderful ways to have children learn in their environment by going to their local watersheds, to learn about the environment by studying the fish in those local watersheds, and doing something for the environment by creating these amazing art projects. Stuffed fish on the left, and on the right-hand side, these were fence-mounted paintings of fish that help introduce these issues into a wider community. So quite good sounding. And finally, I've got up as a last slide here where to go to learn more. Green Museum is really the definitive, still, website, and it's an amazing database of artists, of articles, of teaching strategies that you can do. You can go to learn all about environmental art and environmental art education. I've put a couple of my favorite books up there as well. You've got the Green Guide for Artists if you're looking at learning more about materials or techniques that have a lower impact, a more sustainable, eco-friendly approach for the environment. A couple of books, The Earthworks and Beyond, and Ecovention, that will help introduce you to the history of the environmental art movement, but also to artists who are practicing in the field. And a couple other ones that will introduce you to specific projects you can do. The Eco Books is one of my favorite new ones. It's just a fresh new book on the market about how to do bookmaking, which is a great way to bring in environmental education, art education, and also literacy all together. And if you can pull old materials from the recycling bin, all the better. And I've got to tell you about Sharon Gamson-Dank's new book, Asphalt to Ecosystems, because it's got a chapter in it that looks at art in schoolyards. So it's a wonderful one, too. And I'm going to be very self-serving and put a plug in. I've got a new website up that I just put up late in the fall, and it's got lots more photographs of environmental art that's being done in community settings as well as school settings. So a lot of my articles are up there, too, so the reference is there for you as well. So I'm really interested to know what your environmental art are. Tim, can you report back into us what people had typed in?
Absolutely. And actually, Hilary, why don't you move us on to the next slide, and we'll come back to your email address in a few moments.
Oh, okay. And you know what? I just had a question for Rebecca. She said, I can't see the website at the bottom. I'm sorry, Rebecca. That must have gotten cut off. I thought it was just on my screen. It's www.Hilary, Inwood, all one word, only one L, .ca, and that will get you to my my website.
Great, thank you. Thank you very much, Hilary. And by the way, for those people who are were scribbling down websites, we're going to send out an email tomorrow to every one of you and to all the others who registered but weren't able to make it tonight, and we can include any of these URLs that Hilary wants, and Hilary's email address if she would like as well.
Yeah, that's perfectly fine.
Great. So you've now got on the screen an opportunity to type in questions to Hilary, and so please take advantage of it. If you have more than one question, what I would ask you to do is to type in one question, then hit the submit button, and then type in a second one. And I will start relaying your question. I will start relaying your questions to Hilary in just a minute. Now, to answer your question, Hilary, to report back, the eco-artists that people identified were Gary Larson, the wonderful cartoonist, Ansel Adams, and, of course, Andy Goldsworthy. And among the interesting projects that people are involved with, there were some like student photography or doing recycling projects with kids using waste materials. There were also but there were several interesting ones that I hadn't heard of. A sense of place photography project. Another one was the most interesting and unusual one for me was using pieces of leftover drywall for what's called subtractive sculpture in an inner city elementary school. And maybe the person who asked that question or who's working on a subtractive sculpture could tell us in the chat room what that's all about.
Well, my guess is that inside drywall is plaster. So my guess is it's probably a carving technique. It's a relief carving technique right onto the plaster. But what a great use of leftover drywall that would normally go to landfill. Fantastic.
Okay, I'm just looking to see if any questions have been asked already, and I will report back in just a minute.
And Rick, thank you very much on your feedback on the website. I worked hard on it, and I had a great web designer who is also an artist help me with the design. But all the photographs you see on the main page there are my own. So I appreciate your feedback. And
we actually don't have any questions at the moment.
Oh, my goodness.
Yeah. Well, that isn't that is that a statement, Hilary, that you've covered the landscape so completely that nobody can think of a question?
No, I'm certainly hoping that's not the case. Oh, Rebecca's saying she submitted a question.
Rebecca, I will go look for it again on the back office. Somehow it's not showing up. I'll try again.
Rebecca, if you just type it into the main room, I can actually pick it up right off the screen. I think, folks, thanks for your patience. I think this might have to do with just the technical difficulties we were experiencing. Something's not working quite as it should tonight. That's wonderful. Rebecca's saying that she's planning an art-inspired Earth Day event. How wonderful.
Folks, if I'm for some reason I'm having yet another technical difficulty where your questions aren't showing up yet in the back office where they normally do. So if you could ask your question in the chat room and hit enter, that'll give Hilary a chance to see it and me too, and get a chance for Hilary to answer your question.
I love your idea, Rebecca, of making the clothesline. That's a really neat one. I like that. It's a great way of showing the messages off. And if you're using, I'm not sure if you're going to put clothing on there that's already being used. I think that would be a great way to do it. Oh, Rebecca's question is, do you have suggestions on how to solicit this type of artwork from the public? Not sure exactly what you mean there, Rebecca. Is that, do you want...
I can jump...
Nope.
I can jump in here. I finally found the questions, and let me just first, probably I've got the longer version of Rebecca's question here.
Okay, great.
So let me jump in. So we are planning, Rebecca says, an art-inspired Earth Day event, a clothesline where people can decorate clothing with their messages for Earth Day. Do you have any ideas for recruiting art from the public before the event?
And this is where I'm still looking. Rebecca, can you just tell us whether you want clothing for the clotheslines that you're trying to collect together, or is it actual environmental art that you're encouraging people to bring to the event?
While we're waiting for Rebecca to clarify that, let me go to another question from Holly. She said, I like the knit bombing. Does knit bombing harm or affect the tree or insects or animals living in the tree, or does it enhance them?
Oh, and that's a great question, Holly. I wish I could say I knew the answer to it. My guess is that on this particular tree, we've had that project up for about a year, and it certainly hasn't been to the detriment of the tree. We have seen some animal interaction with it, and the interaction is that we've been seeing, on occasion, birds picking at the piece, and I think it's because they want the wool for their nest. So, I would have thought that if you use natural wool for those types of projects, it's not going to have any detrimental effect. It will biodegrade over time, especially if it does get dispersed into nests. Whether it would affect the insect population is a good question, and I'm sorry, I just don't know the answer to that. But I would hope that if you don't leave it up for too long, and if you are concerned about the insect and animal populations, just leave it up for a short installation time, and I think it would be just fine.
Great. And Hilary, you can see Rebecca's clarified that really what she's trying to do is recruit. She's going to have people decorating at the event, but any advice about how to approach the public for them to contribute art in advance?
I would talk to your local community art council is a great way to do it. I know that in our community, we actually have an art tour that artists put together once or twice a year. And I know I've always collected those brochures, so I've got their contact information. So I have a list of all the local artists in our area. And it's been my experience that when I those artists and ask them to contribute something, they're always really happy to do so. So if you can talk to your local community arts organization, I think they'd probably help with either advertising or contacting those artists to help you in some way with that event.
And another question is about using natural materials. And can you give us any advice as to what natural materials to use?
Oh, yeah, and there's so many that you can. And in fact, this is an area that I'm really starting to experiment more and more in my own art making. Um, you can you can actually have some fun with this in a community center or in a schoolyard by planting materials that you know are good for art making. So grapevine is one that can be quite invasive. We already had grapevine on our school property, so it was an easy one to use as my local school property. And so for us to cull it once a year or twice a year to use for sculpture projects is great because it keeps the grapevine under control and it gives children a natural art material to work with. But you can also consider growing your own plants for natural dyes. So that can be a really great project for children. They can learn a little bit more about where natural pigments come from. They can harvest those plants in a sustainable way that won't kill them out. Often they're indigenous plant species. And that you can actually make your own natural dyes. And there's lots of websites that can teach you how to do that. And then they can use that. One of the projects we did at a school project that I helped a little bit on was to actually take those natural dyes that the children made themselves from materials on their schoolyards. They dyed their own fabric and they created a giant environmental quilt that's based on the plant life and animal life in their schoolyard. So there's lots of examples. Leaves are a fantastic one. They are great in so many different ways. You can paint on leaves, you can trace around leaves, you can draw from leaves. And most schoolyards, most community centers have lots of trees around them. So certainly you can use those natural materials that are really, readily at hand for art making as well. So I think of it in terms of ones that you can plant, even those vegetables that you can plant. Beets are fantastic for art making, believe it or not, again, because of their natural dye properties. So lots of different ways you can both either go looking for natural materials or actually grow them on site to use for art programs.
Great. Hilary, another question from Rick Reynolds in Portland, Oregon. Hi, Rick. A good question, like the others. Rick's question, Hilary, is, are you aware of any new research that supports the benefits of art and environmental art in education?
Yeah, my own. Sorry, Rick. Sounds kind of self-serving, Rick. I did my doctoral studies, and this just ended 2 years ago. And as far as I know, I'm probably got we were working across 4 different school sites to investigate the properties of bringing environmental ed and art ed together. I can certainly, I'm just trying to think, on my website, if you go to some of my articles, you're going to see others who have done some work in this area. I find, though, that a lot of times what you get is an individual case study written up rather than any cross-site studies or multiple site studies. So a lot of it is also theoretically based. I personally like to take the theory into practice. So I can recommend my own, and I know that there's experimentations going on all the time. It's just not always written up formally as research.
The next question, actually, Hilary, is a follow-up to just what you've said. Shauna wanted to ask, are the strategies that you mentioned in your presentation earlier, you kind of went through a list, you went through various kinds of environmental art strategies. Are some of the ones you mentioned available or talked about on your website?
They are. In fact, I've just published an article in Art Education magazine. It came out in November, and a lot of those are touched on in that article. And the article's posted on my website, so you can pull it right off there.
Excellent. Susan Bircher is asking a question. She said, have you ever had students crunch berries or charcoal or other minerals to demonstrate how to create one's own paint?
I haven't done that personally, but I've certainly seen it done, and I've experimented it with myself. You can do that and have them make milk paints. Milk paints are fantastic sort of paint formulations from pioneer times, from the 18th and 19th century, that are non-toxic. They're a little different from contemporary paints, though. You won't get the same kind of really bright, vibrant, saturated colors that you get in a commercial paint. So there's the challenge. But, there are more and more material distributors that are starting to experiment now with natural pigments at the basis for their formulation. So using charcoal is a great way to teach children about that. And fantastic to have them experiment. Egg tempera is another form of painting. that was used heavily in the Middle Ages and that's fallen out of favor. It uses egg yolks as the liquid and makes a beautiful sort of like a glaze that you layer the glazes of color up one on top of the other, and it actually lasts a really long time. So with any of those techniques, it's really easy to just do a net search on whatever it is you're looking at, egg tempera or, carbon-based pigments. It's astounding what's out there on the net. For many cases, you can find recipes right off the internet for that.
The next two questions are specific to age levels, and I'll kind of rephrase them a little bit, but one of them is, what would be your two favorite activities to do with kids who are less than 10?
Oh, good question. You're putting my memory to work here. Two favorite activities for kids less than 10. You know what? I've got to say that taking them outside to draw anything, whatever you've got there. It doesn't matter if it's elements of the natural environment or elements of the built environment. I've got to admit that taking them on a little walking tour and having children draw what they find along the way and creating that into a book is, in my mind, a great way to bring, again, literacy together with our art making, and a great way to have them focus on place. For younger children, I don't tend to introduce them to environmental issues. If they raise them, that's fine, but for the most part, I really just try to get them attached to the wonder of their local place. So certainly having them draw from it is a really easy way. Photography these days, and I'm glad somebody else raised that as a project. Somebody was mentioning that they do sense of place photos with their learners. That works with any age, and it works beautifully with younger children. You can give them a cut-out cardboard frame, sort of like what you would have found like an old-fashioned slide casing. A piece of rectangular cardboard with another rectangular bit cut out. You can take one camera with a whole group of young learners, and they find their shot by looking through the viewfinder, the cardboard viewfinder you've given them, and then you give them the camera just to take that photo once they've found that. So really easy, low-impact way. Digital photography is fantastic these days. Yes, it takes a little bit of electricity, but you can get some really amazing photographs that can be displayed small scale or projected large scale with an LCD projector to have a huge impact, that are a great way for children to really look carefully at the world around them as they go. So I guess those would be two of mine. Drawing is a great way to increase that sense of observation of place, as is photography.
And that probably is the toughest question I'll throw at you, Hilary, because you have such an encyclopedic knowledge of the topic. Asking you to pick the two favorites is not an easy question. The other question is a similar one, though. So let's assume that the kids are 13, 14. They're in middle school, or they're in a community center in a non-formal program, but they're 13, 14-year-olds. Would you choose different projects for that age?
You know what? I've done that same sense of place photography project with grade 7 and 8 students who are exactly in that age range. Except we did that as mentioned. They took photographs to start, then they brought them back into the classroom. They printed them out just on the classroom printer, and then we created them into a large-scale 36-inch square drawing, and then they added their own poetry to it. So what I do like to do with the older learners, yes, you can certainly get into more complex and more complicated forms of techniques, but you can also add a whole lot more layers, which is kind of fun. They can also get into more community-based work for older children, and I think because they're able to understand more about the challenges we're facing environmentally, and because they really, often at that age, really want to start to be involved in the adult world, it's a great time to get them involved in their own environmental action. And I love at any age having exhibits or celebrations of some kind to really bring in the adults of the community as well, whether those are parents, whether those are community members, to engage them in the conversation. Sometimes it's the young learners that are the ones who can really drive the point home about environmental issues, be them local or more global, in a much more powerful way with adults than we might think, right? They can bring a really great, strong sense of guilt to adults to change their own behavior. Because let's face it, we can change all we want with the youngsters, and I think most of our youngsters are changing their behaviors about environment pretty quickly and pretty naturally now. They've all grown up with recycling. I don't think the kids are going to be the issue. It's the adults, frankly, who are the problem right now. So the more we can use art education to reach the young learners, but also to reach adults in those communities, fantastic. That's a great way to go.
And that's great advice. Thank you very much. Folks, if you've got any more questions, I don't have any more in the back office. You can feel free to ask them in the chat room or in the back office. But we're going to and we're happy to field those questions. What I'd like to do now is to well, first of all, thank Hilary for an amazing presentation. And I'd like you, I didn't have a chance to say at the beginning, but we have a sort of end of session evaluation where I'd like you to take, which I'll put on the screen right now, and ask you to take a moment. Hopefully you can see it here now. I'll just show you it's 5 questions. And you can scroll down at your own leisure. And we're asking if you would take a moment to do this because it gives us not only great feedback, but it also helps us get a sense of what you liked and disliked about the presentation, what could be better. And while you're doing that, I should just mention that 2 of the people who fill out this form will receive a 1-year free digital subscription to Green Teacher too. So I don't mean to interrupt if you've got more questions, by all means ask them in the chat room. But if you would take a moment and fill out this evaluation survey, I'd be delighted. The other thing that's wonderful to see, Hilary, and I think you've had a chance to glance at it from time to time, but we've had the chat. There's been a great conversation in the chat room, and people have answered each other's questions in some cases, and also some really good suggestions about things that projects that they're working on.
Well, and I just want to invite people. I'm just in the process of pulling a book together on this very topic, and I'm really interested in collecting some stories of people's projects from around the world. So if you've got my email address there, if you want to continue the conversation in future as you develop your own projects, please do let me know what you're working on. I'd be really interested in hearing about them. And you're very welcome to all of you who are saying thank you. Thank you for tapping in today.
And I love Rebecca's comment, which of course is just one of the problems with the chat room is as soon as you start reading something, it disappears because more people are adding to the chat room. But Rebecca, you had a really interesting about using a roll up the rim cups, a pickup activity, and arranging them in designs and taking aerial shots of them. What a brilliant activity!
I love that idea too. I think it's a great use of little Tim's cups.
And please, folks, as you're filling out this end of session there, please be frank, and all your frank answers will be very helpful to us. And but I think you can see, Hilary, that the reception has been very, very positive, and that's no surprise. It was a fantastic presentation. I'll do one more check in the back office for questions. And we have no more questions, so I guess we will wrap it up. But I want to thank all of you for taking the time to join us in tonight's webinar. Hilary, a big, big thanks to you, especially for rescuing me at the beginning with our technical difficulties. I still haven't figured out how that happened. And we never did hear the archive gong, which is quite rude and interruptive. So that's a good thing. And on my side, at least, it says that the archive was started. And in just a moment, I will stop the archive, and hopefully we've captured this presentation so that others who couldn't join us tonight will have a chance to make great use of it. And I've been getting email messages over the last week that people are organizing popcorn parties. Teachers in schools are deciding that they're going to do special development by listening and watching some of the webinars. And a staff at a nature center in New York City are having a popcorn party to look at one of the presentations next week. So it's and you, Hilary, have just contributed a fabulous session that's going to be watched by many, many people. So huge thanks
Thank
to
you
you.
very much, Tim, for inviting me to be involved. I really appreciate it.